The Silent Negotiation. Commander Marcus Rice stood at the viewport of the United Earth Defense Force carrier Resolute, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. The mining colony of Titan IV stretched below, its industrial structures casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The Corveth Empire's warships had arrived 3 days ago, their sleek black vessels hovering like predatory shadows above the human settlement. The Corvath claimed the colony was built on sacred ground, though curiously, they had waited 5 years to mention this fact, precisely when the colony began producing rare elements crucial for warp drive construction. Ambassador Tkrell, a towering creature with crystalline scales and multiple limbs, had delivered an ultimatum: abandon the colony or face annihilation. Commander, Lieutenant Sarah Chen approached, her voice tight with concern. The Galactic Council mediators have arrived. They're requesting your presence in the negotiation chamber. Marcus turned, his expression unreadable. For 3 days, bureaucrats and diplomats from across the galaxy had attempted to resolve the situation. The Corveth remained inflexible, citing ancient rights and religious precedent. Each session ended with more demands, more threats, more posturing. The negotiation chamber was crowded with representatives from various species. Ambassador Tkrell stood at the center, his scales shimmering with barely contained anger. The council mediator, a diminutive being known as Wise Speaker Jolu, floated between the parties in his anti-gravity platform. Now then, Jolu began, his many appendages gesturing for calm. Let us resume our discussions. Commander Rice, surely you understand the cultural significance. Marcus raised a hand, silencing the mediator. The entire chamber fell quiet as the human commander walked to the center, his boots echoing on the metallic floor. He faced Tkrell directly, meeting the alien's 4 eyes without flinching. We've listened, Marcus said quietly. We've heard your claims. We've reviewed your evidence, his voice carried despite its low volume. We're done talking. The room erupted in confusion. The Zephyrian delegation clicked their mandibles anxiously. The aquatic Neptarians splashed in their containment tanks. Even Wise Speaker Jolu seemed at a loss for words. Ambassador Tkrell's scales flared bright red. Commander, you cannot simply. I can, Marcus interrupted. And I have. He turned to Lieutenant Chen. Signal all forces. Execute Operation Silent Dawn. The Corvath ambassador lunged forward, but 2 human marines stepped between them. You will regret this, human. The might of the Corveth Empire. Marcus had already begun walking away. Over his shoulder, he called, Lieutenant, please escort our guests to their ships. This facility is now under military lockdown. Within minutes, the alien delegations found themselves politely but firmly guided to their vessels. As Tkrell's ship departed the station, he transmitted a final warning across all channels. You have sealed your fate, humans. The Corveth fleet will reduce your colony to atoms. But something strange happened in the hours that followed. The expected human panic never materialized. No desperate communications begging for mercy. No frantic evacuations. Instead, an eerie silence fell over Titan IV as human ships began precise, methodical movements around the colony. On the observation deck of the neutral monitoring station, representatives from across the galaxy watched with growing unease. The Avian Alliance's military advisor, Wing Commander Kree, adjusted his sensory apparatus nervously. They're not running, he observed. They're not negotiating. They're just moving. Silently. The Mechanist Collective's analyst unit whirred. Pattern analysis suggests tactical deployment. Human vessels taking defensive positions around colony. Energy readings indicate weapon systems. Offline. Perhaps they'd surrendered, suggested the Florian representative, her leafy appendages trembling. Wing Commander Kree shook his feathered head. No. Watch their movements. Perfect synchronization. No communication signals. They planned this. As the first wave of Corvath warships approached, the observers held their collective breaths. The massive battlecruisers, each dwarfing the human vessels, powered their weapons and began their attack run. Then the unexpected occurred. The human ships began broadcasting music, not messages of surrender or defiance, but classical Earth compositions. Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor resonated across the void, followed by Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Then Holst's Mars, the bringer of war. The Corvath fleet hesitated, confused by this bizarre response. Their tactical algorithms struggled to process this non-standard behavior. In that moment of hesitation, the human ships acted. Rather than firing weapons, they deployed a massive network of interconnected satellites. Each one began emitting powerful electromagnetic pulses synchronized with the music. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Corvath vessels, their systems calibrated for conventional energy weapons, found their navigation and targeting systems overwhelmed by the rhythmic pulses. Ships began drifting off course, weapon systems failing to lock onto targets. On the bridge of the Resolute, Marcus stood watching the chaos unfold. Lieutenant Chen approached, her face a mixture of awe and confusion. "Sir, the Corvath are requesting communication. They're asking what we're doing." Marcus smiled faintly. "Tell them we're still not talking." The Galactic Council mediators, who had remained to observe the inevitable conflict, transmitted urgent requests for explanation. Marcus ignored them all. The human fleet continued its silent ballet, herding the disabled Corvath ships away from the colony with precise gravitational maneuvers. After 6 hours of this strange dance, Ambassador Tkrell's voice broke through on an emergency channel. "Commander Reyes, this is madness. You cannot simply." The channel cut off mid-sentence. The human ships had activated a communication blackout field, an experimental technology that prevented all forms of transmission within the combat zone. By the time the field lifted 12 hours later, the Corvath fleet had been carefully guided to the edge of the system. Their ships remained undamaged, but utterly neutralized, their crews frustrated and confused. The first message came from the Galactic Council itself. "Commander Reyes, we demand an explanation for this unprecedented." Marcus finally opened communications. His face appeared on screens across the monitoring station. "Distinguished representatives, the situation has been resolved. The Corvath fleet is being escorted out of our system. No lives were lost. No ships were destroyed. The colony remains secure." "But how?" Wise Speaker Jolu stammered. "You never responded to their attack. You never even powered up your weapons." "We did respond," Marcus corrected gently, "just not in the way anyone expected." Sometimes, the most powerful statement is the one left unspoken. The implications of this encounter spread quickly through the galactic community. The humans had demonstrated something new: the ability to win a battle without firing a shot, to answer aggression with calculated silence rather than violence. In the weeks that followed, analysts from every major civilization studied the encounter. The Mechanist Collective dubbed it the Titan IV Paradox, a conflict resolved through the absence of conflict. Military academies began including case studies on human psychological warfare tactics. But it was the Corvath who truly felt the impact. Their reputation as fearsome warriors had been built on the reactions they provoked: fear, anger, desperate resistance. Against human silence, their entire military doctrine proved ineffective. Ambassador Tkrell requested a private meeting with Commander Reyes 1 month after the incident. The two met in a neutral space station, with no mediators present. "Why?" the Corvath asked simply. "Why not fight us directly?" Marcus poured 2 glasses of water, a human custom of hospitality. "Because sometimes the loudest message is delivered in silence. You came expecting war. We gave you confusion. You came prepared for our anger. We gave you our calm." Tkrell's scales shifted to a contemplative blue. "The colony, was it truly that valuable to you?" "Every human life is valuable," Marcus replied. But this wasn't about the colony. It was about changing the conversation. The Corvath ambassador was quiet for a long moment. "We, may have been hasty in our claims. Marcus nodded. Perhaps we can talk about that. But this time, let's start with listening. The human strategy. The aftermath of Titan IV changed everything. Reports flooded into Galactic Council headquarters from observers who had witnessed the encounter. Military strategists from a dozen species demanded access to the recordings, trying to understand how humans had turned silence into a weapon. 3 months after the incident, Fleet Admiral Elena Volkov stood before the United Earth Defense Council. The massive holographic display showed tactical analyses of the Titan IV encounter, with particular focus on what military experts were now calling the Reyes maneuver. Admirals, generals, distinguished colleagues, Elena began, her silver hair reflecting the blue light of the displays. What Commander Reyes demonstrated wasn't just a tactical victory. It was the unveiling of a doctrine we've been developing for decades. Marcus nodded. Silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's a state of mind. It requires absolute trust in your team, perfect preparation, and the patience to let events unfold. The real test came 6 months after Titan IV, when the hegemony of Zorath launched a massive invasion of the Proxima colonies. Known for their overwhelming force and scorched earth tactics, the Zorath expected humanity to either flee or mount a desperate defense. Instead, they encountered Operation Deep Quiet. As Zorath dreadnoughts entered the system, they found it seemingly abandoned. No ships, no communications, no signs of life. Their commanders, suspicious of a trap, proceeded cautiously. For 3 days, they searched empty colonies, growing increasingly paranoid. On the 4th day, human ships began appearing at the edge of sensor range, only to vanish when pursued. Strange signals echoed through subspace, not messages, but patterns that seemed almost like heartbeats. The Zorath crews grew restless, jumping at shadows. On the 7th day, the psychological pressure reached its peak. Zorath soldiers reported hearing whispers in empty corridors, seeing movement in their peripheral vision. Their own paranoia had become the enemy. When human forces finally revealed themselves, the Zorath fleet was in complete disarray. Ships had fired on each other in the confusion, crews were near mutiny, and command structure had collapsed. The human fleet surrounded them, still maintaining radio silence. Admiral Volkov, commanding from the carrier Tranquility, waited until the Zorath flagship broadcast a surrender request before speaking her first words of the engagement. "Welcome to human space. We accept your surrender." The Proxima victory established humanity as a major power not through superior firepower or larger fleets, but through mastery of psychological warfare. The silent protocol became required study at military academies across the galaxy. Yet not all species were deterred. The Krell Confederacy, an alliance of warrior cultures, saw the silent protocol as a challenge rather than a deterrent. They began developing counter-strategies, including AI systems designed to operate without constant communication. The first test of these new systems came during the Andromeda Reach incident. Krell automated warships, programmed to function without verbal commands, engaged human forces near a disputed mining facility. For the first time, human silent tactics seemed ineffective. Commander Lisa Wong, leading the human response, quickly realized the nature of the threat. "They've removed the psychological element," she reported to Admiral Volkov. "These aren't crews we can unsettle. They're machines." The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. James Parker, a civilian cinemusicologist, proposed using the same musical broadcasts that had confused the Corvette, but with a crucial difference. Instead of classical music, they transmitted mathematical sequences converted to sound, the kind of patterns that would force AI systems to analyze and process them. The result was spectacular. The Krell AI, designed for combat, but not for parsing complex musical mathematics, devoted increasing processing power to decoding the transmissions. Their reaction times slowed, targeting systems faltered, and within hours, the entire automated fleet was effectively paralyzed. As news of this victory spread, the galaxy began to understand that human silence wasn't just about psychological warfare. It was about forcing opponents to confront their own assumptions, to question their own methods. The silent protocol evolved beyond military applications. Human diplomats began using strategic silence in negotiations, allowing uncomfortable pauses to prompt concessions. Trade delegations discovered that silent confidence often achieved better terms than aggressive bargaining. Even artistic exchanges were affected. Human performers introduced the concept of active silence to galactic audiences, moments of deliberate quiet that carried as much meaning as sound or movement. But perhaps the most significant change came in how other species viewed humanity itself. No longer seen as newcomers or primitive beings, humans were recognized as masters of a profound truth. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is the space between words, the moment of quiet before action, the silence that speaks louder than any shout. As Commander Reyes noted in his personal log, "We didn't change how we fight. We changed how the galaxy understands conflict itself." The Galactic Lesson. 2 years after the Titan IV incident, the Galactic Council convened an unprecedented summit. Representatives from over 300 civilizations gathered at the neutral station Harmony's Reach. The topic: humanity's transformation of warfare and diplomacy through the silent protocol. High Chancellor Zixnal of the Council opened the assembly. "Distinguished delegates, we gather to address a phenomenon that has reshaped our understanding of conflict resolution. The human approach has proven so effective that we must consider its implications for galactic civilization." In the human delegation, Ambassador Martinez sat beside Admiral Volkov and Commander Reyes, who had become something of a legend across known space. They listened as species after species shared their experiences with human silence tactics. The Merchants Guild reported a 67% increase in successful negotiations when adopting human-inspired techniques. The Peacekeepers Corps noted a dramatic reduction in violent incidents at human-mediated disputes. Even the warrior cultures acknowledged the effectiveness of the silent protocol, though many still found it distasteful. Representative Thuik of the Vornian Collective rose, his chitinous form gleaming under the station lights. "The humans have introduced something our civilizations never considered: the power of restraint. But we must ask, what are the limits of this approach?" Admiral Volkov stood to address the assembly. "The silent protocol isn't about pacifism. It's about choosing our battles wisely. When words become weapons, we choose not to arm ourselves. When violence serves no purpose, we choose not to engage. But make no mistake, when necessary, humanity can and will fight." Her words proved prophetic. 1 month after the summit, the Devourers arrived, an extragalactic species that consumed entire star systems. They communicated nothing, negotiated nothing, simply destroyed everything in their path. The Galactic Council turned to humanity, expecting the silent protocol to somehow stop this existential threat. They were shocked by the human response. "This isn't a misunderstanding to be resolved," Commander Reyes explained to the emergency session. "This is a cancer that must be excised. The silent protocol is for those capable of reason. Against pure destruction, we speak a different language." Operation Thunderous Dawn marked humanity's first full-scale military engagement since adopting the silent protocol. The difference was stark. Human forces coordinated with unprecedented precision, their years of silent training evident in every maneuver. The Devourers, accustomed to opponents who wasted energy on threats and posturing, found themselves facing an enemy that communicated only through action. The conflict lasted 7 months. Human fleets, working in perfect synchronization, systematically dismantled the Devourer invasion force. When it was over, humanity had lost 37 ships and 3,000 lives, the largest casualties they'd suffered in decades, but they had saved dozens of star systems and proved that their silence was a choice, not a weakness. In the aftermath, the galaxy's perception of humanity shifted once again. The silent protocol wasn't seen as a sign of reluctance to fight, but as evidence of wisdom in choosing when fighting was necessary. The Council established the Department of Strategic Communication, with Dr. Rachel Kim, daughter of a veteran of Titan IV, as its first director. Her mandate: study and implement human communication principles across galactic civilization. The human gift to the galaxy isn't silence itself, she explained in her inaugural address. It's the understanding that communication is a tool, not a compulsion. Every word spoken, or not spoken, should serve a purpose. 5 years after Titan IV, the silent protocol had become integrated into galactic society. Military academies taught courses on strategic silence and psychological warfare. Diplomatic corps trained in the art of meaningful pause. Even entertainment incorporated elements of human silence techniques. Commander Reyes, now retired, established the Marcus Reyes Institute for Conflict Resolution on Earth. Students from across the galaxy came to study under the master of silence himself. His most famous lecture, delivered annually, consisted of sitting silently before his students for 1 hour, then asking, "What did you learn?" The answers varied widely, but patterns emerged. Students realized they filled silence with their own assumptions, fears, and prejudices. They understood that silence created space for reflection, for reconsideration, for change. The Corvith Empire, once humanity's bitter enemy, became one of their closest allies. Ambassador Tkrell, his scales now showing the silver streaks of age, often visited Earth to teach at the Institute. Humans taught us that strength isn't always loud, he would tell his classes. Sometimes the most powerful warrior is the one who chooses not to fight. 5 years after Titan IV, the silent protocol had become integrated into galactic society. Military academies taught courses on strategic silence and psychological warfare. Diplomatic corps trained in the art of meaningful pause. Even entertainment incorporated elements of human silence techniques. Commander Reyes, now retired, established the Marcus Reyes Institute for Conflict Resolution on Earth. Students from across the galaxy came to study under the master of silence himself. His most famous lecture, delivered annually, consisted of sitting silently before his students for 1 hour, then asking, "What did you learn?" The answers varied widely, but patterns emerged. Students realized they filled silence with their own assumptions, fears, and prejudices. They understood that silence created space for reflection, for reconsideration, for change. The Corvith Empire, once humanity's bitter enemy, became one of their closest allies. Ambassador Tkrell, his scales now showing the silver streaks of age, often visited Earth to teach at the Institute. Humans taught us that strength isn't always loud, he would tell his classes. Sometimes the most powerful warrior is the one who chooses not to fight. The former Krell Confederacy, after their failed attempts to counter human tactics, underwent a cultural revolution. They developed what they called warrior meditation, practices combining their martial traditions with human principles of strategic silence. Even the mysterious void dancers, beings of pure energy who rarely interacted with corporeal species, expressed interest in human approaches. They communicated through quantum fluctuations that roughly translated to, "Your species understands the music of nothing." But the most profound change came in how conflicts were resolved across the galaxy. The human protocol, as it became known, established 5 principles: silence before speech, action before threat, understanding before judgment, patience before haste, resolution before destruction. These principles reshaped everything from border disputes to trade negotiations. Wars became rarer, not because species feared human intervention, but because they had learned human wisdom. 20 years after Titan IV, Professor Maria Santos published her definitive work, The Silent Revolution: How Humanity Changed Galactic Civilization. In it, she argued that humanity's greatest contribution wasn't technological or military, but philosophical. "We showed the galaxy that evolution isn't always about becoming louder, stronger, or more aggressive," she wrote. "Sometimes it's about becoming quieter, wiser, and more deliberate." The Council established Titan 4 Day as a galactic holiday, not to celebrate a human victory, but to commemorate the moment when silence spoke louder than war. Each year, for 1 hour, all non-essential communication across known space ceased. In that hour of silence, beings of all species reflected on the power of restraint. Commander Marcus Reyes lived to see his 90th birthday, surrounded by students and admirers from across the galaxy. When asked to give a speech, he simply smiled and raised his glass in a silent toast. Everyone understood. The human approach had its critics, of course. Some species argued that the silent protocol was a form of manipulation, that humans had simply found a new way to dominate. Others worried about the loss of traditional forms of conflict resolution. But the results spoke for themselves. In the decades following Titan 4, galactic warfare decreased by 89%. Resources once devoted to weapons were redirected to exploration, art, and science. Species that had been enemies for millennia found common ground in shared silence. The most telling statistic came from the galactic archives. Before humanity's emergence, the average first contact between species resulted in conflict 73% of the time. After the adoption of human protocols, that number dropped to 12%. As humanity expanded further into the galaxy, they carried their philosophy with them. Human colonies became known as places of contemplation and careful action. Human mediators were sought for the most difficult disputes. Human teachers were revered for their ability to convey wisdom through presence rather than words. The phrase, "we're done talking," evolved from a termination of negotiation to a beginning of understanding. It signaled not the end of communication, but its elevation to a higher form. In her final lecture before retirement, Admiral Volkov reflected on humanity's journey. We didn't set out to change the galaxy. We simply refused to change ourselves. In holding to our nature, our patience, our deliberation, our capacity for silence, we showed others a different way. The legacy of Titan 4 lived on, not in monuments or museums, but in the quiet moments between words, in the pauses that prevented wars, in the silence that built civilizations.